I never expected to hear from my stepbrother again, not after all these years. Our relationship had always been strained, to put it mildly. Growing up, we were more like strangers forced to share a house than siblings. After my parents divorced and my mom remarried, we just drifted apart. Well, no, it wasn't drifting, exactly. It was more like an unspoken agreement to stay out of each other's way. There was resentment between us on both sides, I suppose. His mother and my dad's marriage was turbulent at best, and I think he always blamed me for his family's problems. So, when we finally went our separate ways, it was almost a relief. That's why, when I got engaged to Sophie and started planning the wedding, inviting him wasn't even a consideration. We hadn't spoken in nearly 7 years. As far as I knew, he was living in another state, completely out of my life, and honestly, that was fine with me. I had moved on. I had my friends, my life, and soon, a wife. What more did I need? But Sophie insisted. She's always been the kind of person who believes in second chances, who thinks people can change. She knew about my strained relationship with my stepbrother, but when I mentioned him in passing, she encouraged me to reach out. "It's your wedding," she said softly one night, her hand resting on mine. "Family should be there, even if things weren't perfect in the past." Family. That word has always felt loaded to me. Still, her kindness, her belief in reconciliation, made me reconsider. Maybe Sophie was right. Maybe this was an opportunity to heal old wounds, to extend an olive branch, even if it felt uncomfortable. Maybe it was time to close that chapter of my life properly. I sat there, staring at my phone for what felt like hours, trying to think of the right words. What do you even say to someone who was once your closest relative but who now feels like a stranger? Finally, I typed out a message short, to the point. "Hey. I'm getting married next month. Would mean a lot if you could come." I almost didn't send it. My finger hovered over the send button, doubt gnawing at me. What if he didn't respond? What if he said no? Or worse, what if he said yes? But Sophie was watching me from across the room, her hopeful eyes urging me on. So, I sent it. For days, there was no response. I tried to put it out of my mind, focusing on the wedding preparations, the guest list, the never-ending tasks that come with planning a big event. But every time I looked at my phone, I felt a small pang of anxiety. Then, finally, a reply came. Just 3 words. "I'll be there." That was it. No warmth, no excitement, just a cold, factual statement. I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me was relieved that he hadn't ignored the invitation, but another part of me, the part that remembered all the years of resentment, the unspoken animosity between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to go smoothly. The wedding day arrived faster than I'd anticipated. Everything was perfect. The weather, the venue, the flowers, so everything Sophie had dreamed of. My nerves were on edge, but that was to be expected. After all, it's not every day you get married. But as the ceremony began, I couldn't stop glancing at the crowd, scanning the faces of our friends and family, wondering if he'd actually show up. Part of me hoped he wouldn't. Maybe he'd change his mind, maybe something would come up, and he'd miss it. I wouldn't have to deal with the awkwardness of seeing him after all this time. But then I saw him, standing at the back of the room, his hands in his pockets, watching me with an unreadable expression. My stomach twisted into knots. He looked almost the same as I remembered, maybe a little older, a little more worn down by life, but still unmistakably him. I tried to focus on Sophie, on the vows we were exchanging, on the momentousness of the occasion. But the weight of his presence was hard to ignore. I couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking, why he had even bothered to come. The ceremony passed without incident, and soon we were at the reception, the mood light and celebratory. I started to relax, chatting with friends, laughing with family, feeling the joy of the day start to take over. Sophie looked radiant, and I couldn't have been happier. Then, out of nowhere, I heard his voice. He was standing near the microphone, a glass of champagne in his hand. My heart sank. I hadn't asked him to give a speech. In fact, I hadn't expected him to speak at all. But there he was, tapping the mic, drawing everyone's attention. "Hi, everyone," he began, his voice calm but with an edge I recognized all too well. I know I wasn't exactly on the invite list at first. But I'm here now, and I just want to say a few things. A pit formed in my stomach. I glanced at Sophie, who gave me a confused but supportive smile. She didn't know. She had no idea what was about to happen. "I'm sure most of you don't know me," he continued, a crooked smile playing on his lips. "I'm the forgotten stepbrother. You know, the one who didn't quite make the cut for family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, a broken bar, but hey, I'm not bitter." I could feel the tension in the room shift, a low murmur of confusion rippling through the crowd. Sophie's smile faltered, and she glanced at me, worry starting to creep into her eyes. My chest tightened, and I fought the urge to stand up and stop him. "But weddings are funny, aren't they?" he went on, his voice louder now, the bitterness creeping through with every word. "They're supposed to be about bringing people together, about love and unity. Except, sometimes, they just remind you how much has been left unsaid." I wanted to disappear. I could feel every eye in the room on me, the silent judgment, the questions. Why hadn't I told them? Why hadn't I prepared them for this? He took a sip of his champagne, savoring the moment, drawing out the silence before speaking again. "I'll keep this short, don't worry," he said with a chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "I just wanted to remind my dear stepbrother that, no matter how far you run, no matter how much you try to build a new life, you can't escape the past. It always catches up to you. Just like today." The room was dead silent now, the air thick with tension. I could barely breathe. Sophie was looking at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. I could feel my hands shaking, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed by the weight of what was happening. "And don't get me wrong," he added, a sly grin spreading across his face. "I'm happy for you. Really. I just hope you've learned from your mistakes. After all, marriage is about trust, isn't it? And you, my dear brother, have a lot to learn about that." With that, he raised his glass in a mock toast and stepped away from the microphone, leaving the room in stunned silence. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could feel was the heat rising in my face, the humiliation burning in my chest. The rest of the reception was a blur. People tried to carry on, to ignore what had just happened, but the damage was done. Sophie barely spoke to me, her face pale and tight with anger. My friends gave me awkward pats on the back, their eyes filled with pity. My stepbrother was nowhere to be seen. He had left, disappearing as quickly as he had come. That night, after the guests had gone and the venue was empty, Sophie and I sat in our hotel room in silence. I could feel the weight of her disappointment, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked, her voice quiet but laced with hurt. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know how to explain the years of resentment, the complicated history between us, the guilt that had followed me for so long. I had thought I could ignore it, that I could leave it behind and start fresh. But my stepbrother had made sure that wasn't possible. The days that followed were tense. Sophie and I tried to move on, to focus on the honeymoon, to forget about what had happened. But the shadow of that speech lingered, a constant reminder that I hadn't been honest with her, that I had let my past catch up to us. It wasn't until we returned home that I finally confronted the truth. My stepbrother had always been a part of my life, even when he wasn't physically there. The anger, the resentment, the bitterness of it had festered over the years, poisoning everything. And now, it had infected my marriage, too. I knew I had to fix it. I couldn't let him have that power over me anymore. But the question was how?